Well, my friends, JSnip4, YouTube here. I interrupt my normal daily broadcast with something else that I wanted to do that I actually just did spur of the moment. You know, I always tell you I email myself good stories that I want to read you, educational stuff, informative stuff, keep you up with what's happening right now. You know, I always email myself stuff, but I was just getting ready to start. It's 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday evening, in case you're wondering. And I just thought to myself, you know, I did a few videos recently on this David Wilkerson guy, the prophecy of David Wilkerson and all that. But the late Baba Vanga, that sort of thing, with her prophecy. Again, she had about an 80% or so track record of being right, which she said Obama, you know, the 44th president would be black, which she said that, and she died in 1996. So when she said it, which was before that, interesting statement. Sure enough, we had a black president for the first time. But she also said he'd be the last, and there would be a big financial collapse, problem, whatever, that would happen around that time, and he would be the last because of that, or I'm not sure. But I thought one of my favorite all time. I used to study this guy when I was first waking up, even for the first few years of waking up, which I really safely say 2005, 6, 7, 8, I'd say. And that's Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet they called him. And I will say this, you know, me, I'm not a religious guy. I don't believe in the typical religious stuff, you know, whether that's Christian, Catholic, certainly Islam or any other thing. No, I just don't. But I think his story, and I'm going to find it real quick now that I'm saying this, is that he didn't go to school or stopped going to school. He had to help out on his farm or his, you know, parents, whatever. And he was just, I think he like went in the woods one day sitting on a stump. He used to sit on and read a book or something. And he was just like reading the Bible. And then I thought the story goes that's, you know, this angelic being, whatever, something, some entity came to him. I don't know if it asked him if he wanted to be, you know, help the world, or told him he was going to, you know, I don't remember. So before I blabber off too much stuff that might not even be true, I'm going to pause this video for just a second, which you won't even notice, and see if I can find that original story before I get into this, because what I want to talk about is Donald Trump and Edgar Cayce's predictions, which actually isn't necessarily Donald Trump, but it's more on President Vladimir Putin of Russia. But you will see, with Trump being president, it would tie in with what Edgar Cayce's predictions about Russia being the beacon of light, if you will, of the world during this time we're talking about right now. So stand by just a second. All right, so this is actually from Wikipedia, and it's got his little biography. So I'm just going to start off with that. And if no one has ever heard of Edgar Cayce, who's that? You know, this guy had over, I think, 14,000 readings. And believe it or not, the Rockefeller family from back in the day, because this guy was around in the early 1900s, died, I think, in 1944. He also prophesied his own death, the exact date, and he was correct, just an FYI. But even the Rockefellers would come see him. And one of the interesting things, too, which they didn't know at first, his family would just let anyone come in, give a donation to the family, and he'll read you, you know. And he would essentially go into like a trance, lay down with his hands like this, lay down, and then something would speak, and it wasn't him, although it was his voice, and it could answer things. This guy had like a 7th grade education, and it was answering and talking like it was, you know, an encyclopedia. But people would come in, who's going to win next Saturday's horse race? And it'd give him the answer. And the family started noticing each time people would come in with these selfish kind of, you know, questions, he would get sick. His body would ache, he wouldn't feel good. And they realized, oh, this only happens when people ask him these, you know, ridiculous questions, self-enrichment type questions. So they had to screen the questions first and then ask them, because if it was one of those questions, they didn't even want it to get to him. Anyways, so it says Edgar Cayce was born, and this guy was like the early 1900s Nostradamus, by the way. Edgar Cayce was born on March 18th, 1877, near Beverly, south of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He was one of 6 children of farmers Leslie B. Cayce and Carrie Cayce. A very spiritual child, he played with the little folk and sometimes saw his deceased grandfather. He regarded them all as incorporeal because he could see through them if he looked hard enough. However, he found it difficult to keep his mind on his lessons at school. He was taken to church when he was 10, and from then on he read the Bible, becoming engrossed and completing a dozen readings by the time he was 12 years old. In May 1887, while reading the Bible in his hut in the woods, he saw a woman with wings who told him that his prayers were answered and asked him what he wanted most of all. He was frightened, but he said that most of all he wanted to help others, especially sick children. He decided he would like to be a missionary. The next night, after a complaint from the school teacher, his father ruthlessly tested him for spelling, eventually knocking him out of his chair with exasperation. At that point, Cayce heard the voice of the lady who had appeared yesterday. She told him that if he could sleep a little, they could help him. He begged for a rest and put his head on the spelling book. When his father came back into the room and woke him up, he knew all of the answers. In fact, he could repeat anything in the book. His father thought he had been fooling before and knocked him out of the chair again. Eventually, Cayce used all his school books that way. So essentially, he could lay on them and sleep on them and then learn what was inside of these books. This is the story. If that's where the story ended, you'd say, what is this nonsense? But it is everything he did as far as read people was recorded. There's a massive library on this. The Cayce Institute, or whatever it was called, the Cayce something or another, has like all this stuff logged. And they just took people's names out for privacy, but they're all there. So there's no disputing that this guy had this incredible power. And he goes on to say, Gnostic Christianity, I think, is where he said was like the most, I guess, the right view or something, if I recall. Don't hold me to that yet. You may want to research that yourself, but something that all these old teachings were correct, also, not just myth, and that Christ wasn't necessarily one person. It was a Christ-like phenomena or thing that would come from time to time, like a reincarnation of the Christ entity thing into other people, including Jesus Christ himself. That's a whole different discussion. So this story, which was posted October 2015 from wakingtimes.com, of all places, which is interesting because a lot of times, you're not going to find anything Edgar Cayce from me for the most part, like on my website where I'm doing big articles or anything. Not happening. I may have discussed him a few times in my YouTube videos. But I always remembered. He said the new North Pole, the poles would move, and the new North would be somewhere near Russia, or would be heading towards Russia. And over the last 10, 15 years, I've followed this movement, with the magnetic fields, with the north and south poles. It's actually moving exactly where he said, and has been speeding up drastically in recent years. But not only that, he said that Russia, regarding like World War III, 80 years, and here's the title, 80 years ago, Edgar Cayce predicted Putin's role in stopping World War III. So you would also need help, if you're Putin, from another country that could easily start World War III, and that would be the United States. So you would need an ally. Would you not? Would you not need an ally? Say, hey, we were good over here. We just need to get this warmongering financial elitists out of the way. Put someone over there. Let's work together and fix the problems of the world and not kill each other. Okay? So 80 years ago, Edgar Cayce predicted Putin's role in stopping World War III. Watching geopolitical events unfold today is like watching a slow-motion train wreck, especially if you're informed by history and understand the connection between world wars and the unseen influences behind international politics and global banking. Edgar Cayce is one of the world's most revered psychics, the sleeping prophet as they called him, and many consider him to be the father of holistic medicine. entering into trance-like states of consciousness at will, he could divine information from some extraordinary plane of existence on behalf of his patients or in response to specific queries from an audience. He was remarkably insightful and accurate, which is why his name is so familiar to so many. Much of what he brought back from the source of his inspired information pertained to specific medical issues, but in the staggering volumes of his readings and written works, there is an abundance of insight and prophecy related to larger global political and social events. Many of Cayce's psychic readings occurred in the early part of the 20th century during 2 world wars and the Great Depression, but before his death in 1947, I thought it was 47, he had already seen many of his predictions come true, including foretelling of the stock market crash in 1929, forecasting events related to both world wars, and even the warning of the ultimately deaths of 2 American presidents. In a series of what he calls world affairs readings, Cayce made many remarkable statements about the future of world finance, world leadership, collective spirituality, and interestingly, the role that somehow Russia was to play as a force of right in the coming global turmoil that we see unfolding before our eyes today. The thorn in the side of Europe. Cayce foresaw the future world crises would hinge on finance, and he pointed to Russia as being the thorn in the side of the financial powers that were organizing themselves against the good of humanity in a post-World War II world. When asked in 1932 about political and economic trends in Europe, Cayce zeroed in on Russia. He said, and again, quick look surprised as you see the way the Eurozone's going right now. Europe is as a house broken up. Some years ago, there was the experience of a mighty peoples being overridden for the gratification and satisfaction of a few, irrespective of any other man's right. That peoples are going through the experience of being born again and is the thorn in the flesh to many a political and financial nation in Europe, in the world. Question: what is the name of the nation referred to? Russia. That was one of the things he said. 70 years after the defeat of the Axis powers, Russia has been reborn. Not only that, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you could say now finally for sure, Russia has definitely been reborn. But the rest of the world is now largely under the thumb of the Western globalist banking cartel. This cartel is organized as the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, and the global network of central banks, reserve banks, development banks, and investment banks that hold the world's elected governments in perpetual receivership and the world's people in bondage to mathematically impossible to pay that debt. Present day on the edge of the knife. In 2013, the U.S. was attempting to invade Syria under obviously false pretenses. Putin prevented U.S. involvement by threatening to intervene militarily in a conflict that at the time had not yet devolved onto the horrid conditions we see today. With the deliberate destruction of Ukraine by the George Soros-funded Color Revolution destabilization team, then the advances of the IMF to debt conquer Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars in forced development loans, Putin's Russia emerged as the singular force capable of checking the banking cabal's global advance and is refusing to allow Ukraine and Crimea to fall into the hands of Western-backed forces. The grand chessboard that is the Middle East is ablaze, and the world is on a razor's edge, caught between the very real possibility of escalation to Third World War and the seemingly distant hope of world leaders suddenly finding sanity and de-escalating the situation. Cayce spoke of Russia's role as being the hope of the world in a coming time such as this. Quote, "In Russia there comes the hope of the world, not as that sometimes termed of the communistic or Bolshevik, no, but freedom. Freedom. That each man will live for his fellow man. The principle has been born. It will take years for it to be crystallized, but out of Russia comes again the hope of the world. Edgar Cayce, 1944. That's exactly what we're seeing. President Obama, we're taking we want all the ambassadors to leave the country immediately. All Russians, get out of here. Russia's response, we're not kicking you Americans out, you can stay. We want to go take over Syria. Because remember, that was a plan. And Lindsey Williams' friend told him in advance. They're going to go into Egypt first, and they're all going to give these countries to the Muslim Brotherhood. This was said in 2010. I heard him say it, and I repeated it. Egypt first, Yemen second, Libya third, Syria fourth, and I believe Saudi Arabia next, to cause a massive global economic crash to which Saudi Arabia and the Middle East would sell off their bonds, treasury bonds, U.S. treasury bonds, which would cause panic everywhere, cause our economy to have major problems too. We would devalue those bonds or the dollar, and they wouldn't be able to loan them fast enough, hurting them financially, who would then say, we're not selling you oil anymore. Gas prices would be exploding at the time, way higher than 2008 levels. But it never manifested. Why was that? We've been stuck on Syria for years. Remember, this was 2010. I heard them say it. And he said in 4 to 5 months is their plan to start this. In 4 to 5 months, it happened. They went into Egypt. Color revolution. The Facebook social media revolution. Remember that? And then they had a vote in Egypt. Who won? The guy from the Muslim Brotherhood beat the Egyptian guy. 51-49 election results. Again, where do we hear those numbers? So that plan was there. Who stopped it? Why can't we get past Syria? Russia. We want to take out ISIS. Russia goes in and takes out ISIS. Oh, no, we don't need your help. How many times did we hear, even on mainstream news over the last few years, another weapons dump, parachuted off that was supposed to be for the Syrian rebels, taken by ISIS again. Another one again. 43 brand new Toyota pickup trucks given to ISIS. Who's the one who's stomping them out like cockroaches? Vladimir the bear riding Putin. Okay? That's who. Notice how he's not aggressive. He's not going in, setting up military bases across the planet, spreading quote unquote democracy. He's just responding to the U.S. hegemony. But I've never forgotten what Edgar Cayce said. He said, I remember, that Russia would be like the beacon of light, freedom, hope, whatever it was. And there it is. But out of Russia comes again the hope of the world. And now we've got a president, Mr. Trump, who you would need an ally for sure over here to help you rid the world of these parasitic, globalist, elitist banksters. And I know that sounds weird when you say, well, who did Trump pick for his Treasury Secretary? Goldman Sachs who? And this other guy, Goldman Sachs number 2. And this other guy, Goldman Sachs number 3. Ooh, that's kind of weird. So, I get it. I know. I'm doing the videos on these people. Well, believe me, I know. So he says, the spiritual development in leadership of Russia. Even before World War II, Cayce appears to have foreseen the need for Russia to evolve spiritually in some manner so that it would be able to rise in opposition of the decaying moral values of the capitalistic West and play its part as the great hope of the world. Cayce was asked, what should be the attitude of so-called capitalist nations towards Russia? On Russia's religious development will come the greater hope of the world. Then that one or group that is the closer in its relationships may fare the better in the gradual changes and final settlement of conditions as to the rule of the world. 6 months later, additional information was presented which helped to clarify his earlier prediction. Out of Russia, you see, there may come that which may be the basis of a more worldwide religious thought or trend. When Hugh Lynn Cayce asked about the Russian situation in June 1938, he was told, "A new understanding has and will come to a troubled people. Here, because of the yoke of oppression, because of the self-indulgences, has arisen another extreme. Only when there is freedom of speech, the right to worship according to the dictates of the conscience, until these come about, still turmoils will be within." Speaking on the current state of U.S. and Russia relations at a recent summit, Vladimir Putin said regarding America, "You must rise above the endless desire to dominate. You must stop acting out of imperialistic ambitions. Do not poison the minds of millions of people, like there can be no other way but the imperialistic politics." Cayce also, that was Putin, Cayce also made comments about America's future moral decay. You know where we are these days? Speaking of moral decay, who's leading the charge? USA! USA! In the final World Affairs reading given on June 22nd, 1944, less than 6 months before his death, well, I thought he died in 47. See, I told you I thought it was 44. He addresses the spirit and the sin of America. He says, what is the spirit of America? Most individuals proudly boast freedom. Freedom of what? When ye bind men's hearts and minds through various ways and manners, does it give them freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of want, or freedom from want? In the application of these principles, America may boast, but rather is that principle being forgotten, and that is the sin of America. That was from it doesn't say actually. Cayce also predicted the possibility of a third world war. He spoke of strifes arising in, tell me if you heard these 2 names, or 3 names, if I didn't just freaking tell you. And I didn't actually remember this. This is new to me now from Cayce. Cayce also predicted the possibility of a third world war. He spoke of strifes arising in Libya and in Egypt, in Ankara, and in Syria? Through the straits around those areas above the Persian Gulf, he said. Are you telling me that he just named 3 out of the 5 or whatever that Edgar, Lindsey Williams' friend, told him back in 2010 that I got to watch happen exactly 4 to 5 months later like he said would? Possibility of a third world war. However, we've been stopped in Syria, and that is a good thing. We can only hope that this quote-unquote possibility is now squashed. But I find a lot of what he has said all over the place, not even just about this exact stuff, just some of the stuff he's predicted in the past and things that would happen. And, I think he talked about a 5th root race that would come or something like that. Edgar Cayce, 5th root race. Is that right? 5th root race. There's no getting around it. A sense of destiny permeates the young adults, teenagers, and children of our world, and there's no culture or society devoid of sacred stories that predicted this, the rise and dominance of what is often referred to as the 5th root race. Cayce. Of the many versions of root races that have emerged, the most well-known are from Theosophy and from Edgar Cayce. The Theosophical version names 7 progressions of such evolutionary change beginning around 18 million years ago with the entry of spirit into matter, or the first root race, and ends around 8,000 years. Hence, when humankind is said to transcend the need for schools and social structures like what exists today, the 7th root race. Cayce, however, spoke of that initial appearance of the first root race as happening further back in time, around 4.5 billion years ago. Curiously, he pegged the rise of the 5th root race between 1998 in 2015. No one knows why he never mentioned any other evolutionary leap beyond that. And that is an interesting year, if I don't mind saying so myself. That time frame, 98 to 2015. The invention, essentially, and use of the internet. Look at it now. Kids with their phones and their tablets, they're already, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're already swiping and doing stuff online. And I know, playing games and nonsense and focused on these damn things, but we have this, more importantly, one thing. Instant communication and information at our fingertips across the world. You can look up anything. You can learn how to do anything online. So as he talked about, hence when humankind is said to transcend the need for schools and social structures like what exists today. We don't need these schools anymore. How many times do I got to talk about this? College is obsolete now. It's obsolete. Everything's on the internet that you need. I taught myself how to program on the internet. And I use it on a day-to-day basis, actually. So I bettered my life, financially speaking, because of that. And my knowledge of never knowing that, now I know it. Now I can do programming and interesting things with it, So, again, it's the wave of the future. Anyways, just wanted to cover that today. I felt like talking about it, that there is a little beacon of hope, light of hope from Putin. If you can just get Trump in there, which it looks like it's a done deal now, hopefully they don't kill this man, because then it's going to be, in my opinion, a reversal, and the possibility of World War III then goes up drastically. Take care.